Okay, so here we go. Some interesting talks coming up, some of which Carl gave us a teaser for, and then a couple from Ontario. So we have 5 talks, 2 of which are students. For the 15 minutes, I'm going to be sitting here and I'll give a 5-minute and a 2-minute. And then for the 5-minute talks, you can just go and I'll eventually come up if you're getting your 10 minutes or something like that. And then, yeah, let's get started. So first off, we have Chloe. Come on up.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about how subsurface artificial refugia can provide an escape from heat and exposure stress for 3 at-risk snake species in southern BC along snake exclusion fencing. And before I start, I just want to thank all my co-authors who are listed here and also acknowledge that this work was done as part of an ongoing partnership between Thompson Rivers University, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the Osoyoos Indian Band, and that all of the work took place on the traditional territory of the Osoyoos Indian Band and Syilx people. Oh, this is my job, and I messed it up already.
Sorry, I changed stuff to check that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Exclusion fencing has proven to be a really effective tool in reducing the incidence of human-wildlife interactions, and it's often employed by land managers to minimize animal presence in human-occupied areas, particularly when cohabitation could pose risks to both humans and wildlife. However, exclusion fencing can also have negative impacts for wildlife by impeding their movement and fragmenting their habitat. Reptiles and amphibians are highly susceptible to these negative impacts of exclusion fencing because of their high degree of site fidelity, relatively low mobility, and thermoregulatory constraints. And together, these different factors make them really vulnerable to exposure-induced mortality as they attempt to navigate exclusion fencing. So in this very shaky video, I'm holding my phone in tongs, but you can see this juvenile rattlesnake trying to kind of get through the fence, and they'll just keep moving along the fence like that, even if it's really hot, which can often lead to mortality. So approaches such as coverboards and underground refugia have been proposed and implemented as a means of providing shelter from exposure stress. However, the thermal properties and overall effectiveness of different refugia designs haven't really been tested, and so we wanted to do that. So just overall, our objectives were to design and construct artificial refugia that were easy to construct and install using low cost and easily acquired materials. We wanted to evaluate whether these refugia structures provide thermal refuge for snakes, especially during periods of extreme heat when that risk of exposure stress is really high. We also wanted to monitor if and how snakes utilize these refugia and record their patterns of use. So our study took place in the South Okanagan region, which you're now familiar with because Carl talked about it a lot, out of the Ankeny Desert Cultural Center, which is located on the Osoyoos Indian Reserve. This is a really relatively arid ecosystem, which is inhabited by Western rattlesnakes, Great Basin gopher snakes, and Western yellow-bellied racers, among others, but these 3 species are the focus of our study. And status reports in all these 3 species have identified habitat loss and fragmentation as population threats. So this is an aerial view of part of the study site. And you can see that there's quite a lot of development in the southern portion, golf course, housing, campground. And in the early 2000s, about 4 kilometers of fencing was installed to try to keep snakes out of those more developed areas. And soon after that installation, mortality started being recorded along the fence line. That prompted the installation of coverboards, which were somewhat effective in providing thermal refuge. They maintained slightly lower temperatures, but snakes weren't really using them all that much, and snakes were still dying on the fence, which prompted us to start this refugia study. So along a 2-kilometer section of the fence, which is shown in orange there, we installed 6 refugia in 2020 and another 4 in 2022. And we chose hotspots for both mortalities and captures along the fence to try to maximize the likeliness that these structures would be beneficial and actually get used. So for our data collection, we used iButton data loggers both inside the refugia as well as placed in shaded ambient locations near the refugia. And these iButtons recorded temperatures every 2 hours over our study period, which was May to September every year. We also used motion-activated trail cameras on the underside of lids to record use, and we did this for 4 years from 2020 to 2023. So you're probably wondering what they actually look like, or you now know because Carl actually put a schematic up, but here it is again. So the main chamber of the refugia was made of a 5-gallon bucket, and we put some natural substrate in the base for the snakes. The tubes were made of 1.5-inch PVC. We coated the inside with PVC cement and sand to increase traction for the snakes. As I mentioned, those eye button data loggers, which we affixed to the inner chamber wall to measure internal temperature, a camera underneath the lid to monitor use. The lid was pretty much flush with the ground, and we would generally put some rocks and sticks and stuff on top for camouflage. And then we would have 2 entrances facing in both directions along the fence to maximize the chance that a snake would actually encounter it if it was moving along the fence. Here's a couple photos of them in real life. The external view of a completed one, you can see the 2 entrances along the fence. Here we have one of those entrances close up. This is showing the installation process. This one actually got 3 entrances. And then this is a lid with the camera underneath. So jumping into results, we'll start with temperature patterns. Overall, we found that the daily temperatures remained much more consistent or less variable over 24-hour periods than ambient temperatures. So generally, they were staying much warmer at night than outside and much cooler during the day. I'm going to kind of zoom in on a particular moment in time, though, that really shows how valuable the thermal properties of these refugia could be for snakes. And that is the 2021 heat dome event, which took place in the last few days of June and first few days of July in 2021. So on the figure here, on the x-axis, we have date. On the y, we have temperature. And then each of the dots is one of the temperatures recorded by those data loggers every 2 hours. So the refugia are in pink, our reference or ambient data loggers are in gold. And then we also matched hourly Environment Canada Weather Station data to each of the data logger times, and those are in green. So during that period, the daily maximum temperature of the ambient temperatures and the data loggers exceeded 35 degrees for 10 days straight. So that's really hot. Oh, sorry, something weird is happening. Going forward. Okay, sorry. Over the 8 days that were officially classed as the heat dome, which are indicated by the red dashed lines, the maximum temperature that was recorded in the refugia was under 32 degrees, whereas the maximum recorded by the ambient data loggers was 46. So a huge difference there. And on average, the daily max was roughly 11 degrees cooler inside the refugia than ambient. And so for our 3 study species that we were focusing on, their critical maxima range from about 39 to 42 degrees Celsius. So that means that these refugia may have provided life-saving thermal refuge for snakes during that heat event. Now, creating a favorable thermal microenvironment is obviously really important for snakes. But perhaps more importantly, we found that snakes did actually use the refugia as well. So in total, we recorded 807 total uses of the refugia over those 4 years. Rattlesnakes were by far the most common, but we did also see lots of gopher snakes and also some racers. We have really good mark recapture data for rattlesnakes at this site from over 20 years of study, but we don't for the other 2 species. So we don't really know whether these differences in use reflect relative abundance on the landscape or whether rattlesnakes were actually much more inclined to use them. But it is good that we saw all 3 species using them. So on the x-axis of this figure, we have year, and on the y, we have the proportional use. So that is just the number of uses per refugia per year. And we're just showing it that way because there was more refugia on the landscape in those final 2 years. What is promising is that we saw rattlesnake use gradually increase continually over those 4 years. We didn't see that for the other 2 species, but nice to see for rattlesnakes. And I'll also mention that we did have 1 occurrence of a common garter snake and also 1 occurrence of a desert night snake, which is really cool because they're super rare. I have never actually seen one. But another thing that was cool about this is usually they're found in more kind of rocky areas, and this is really out in the kind of open grassland scrub. So it was quite a cool observation. On to some temporal patterns. The earliest date of use that we recorded was April 29th, and the latest was September 19th. So really used throughout the whole season. The month of July saw roughly 43% of the total uses. That was largely driven by rattlesnake use, and the other 2 species peaked a little bit earlier in the summer. Looking at duration of stay, we found that the refugia visits ranged from less than 1 minute to over 5 days, with a mean duration of just shy of 6 hours. The duration of stay did vary between species, though. Rattlesnakes spent by far the longest, averaging about 6.5 hours. Gopher snakes were next, averaging just over 3 hours, and then racers averaged only 7 minutes, which isn't that surprising because racers are always on the move. Now, another interesting phenomenon that we recorded was that snakes were more than happy to share these structures with other individuals. So here's a photo from inside one of the refugia. It's dark in these chambers, so we are always on night vision mode. And if you're good at identifying BC snakes in night vision, it will be clear that we have a rattlesnake and a gopher snake in this refugia. And this is actually really common. So over a quarter of all refugia uses included a co-occupancy period with at least one other individual. The maximum number of individuals we recorded at one time was 7. This is all rattlesnakes, and it lasted just shy of 15 minutes. The longest co-occupancy by 2 individuals of the same species, 2 rattlesnakes, was just shy of 49 hours. And the longest co-occupancy by 2 different species, a gopher snake and a rattlesnake, was just shy of 64 hours. We also recorded a variety of different behaviors happening inside the refugia. On several occasions, we saw snakes shedding. Often we were able to collect these sheds from inside the refugia or the entrance tubes. We saw mating happening on several occasions. 4 times we observed male-male combat, which is really cool. You don't come across that all that often in the field. Our guess is that these were over females, but we don't know that for sure, but still really cool to see. Quite dramatic, as you can see in the photos. Carl showed you this photo earlier, but on several occasions we saw snakes digesting. Often this would be a rattlesnake with a large bulge in its body from a larger prey item it's just consumed. But you can see this gopher snake has actually just raided an entire nest that looks like he's full of golf balls, but yeah, those are bird eggs. And then on one occasion, we observed a predation event. We had a rattlesnake eat a spadefoot. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look closely, we've got little spadefoot legs sticking out of that rattlesnake's mouth. So lots of activity going on inside these chambers. So to conclude, our results suggest that artificial refugia may be a really valuable tool for mitigating the impacts of exclusion fencing and associated exposure stress on snakes. Our refugia created a preferential thermal microenvironment for snakes, particularly during periods of extreme heat when this threat of exposure stress is likely highest. And while we employed these refugia as mitigation along exclusion fencing, they could also be used likely to compensate for the removal of other natural cover objects or in other human-modified landscapes. Thank you for listening. If anybody wants to chat more about the applicability of this in other landscapes, I would love to. So yeah, please come talk to me. I don't know if we have time.
That was fantastic.
Thanks.
We have lots of time for questions. Would you like to field?
Hi, Chloe. That was
Hi.
great.
Thanks.
I'm just wondering, this is more of just a curiosity thing. I was listening to a talk about desert tortoises and fencing around solar farms. And they were saying that if the fencing was opaque, the turtles were much less likely to just hang around and keep trying to fight their way through the fence. Has anybody considered doing that along that fence to make it?
4 kilometers of opaque fencing is super expensive. So in a lot of cases, this kind of see-through mesh, I totally agree. Like, I think they can just see right through that. And so they think, well, if I'm just not trying hard enough, I can get through. But the amount of upkeep and the price for opaque fencing is a lot higher. And so that was a limiting factor at our site. But definitely in smaller areas, I think opaque fencing is the way to go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, there's actually a new fence. This one has been there since the early 2000s, so it's a little, it's in rough shape. So there's actually a new fence getting put in, so that's definitely something we should consider. Yeah, thanks.
Press it again, give it a good ish. It's not.
There it comes. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Super interesting. Great presentation. I'm curious whether or not you saw a reduction in mortality along the fence after these structures were installed.
Yeah, so we do regular fence surveys, walking the fence to look for live and dead snakes, and we actually didn't record any mortalities while the refugia were out there. The numbers vary year to year before that, so it's not like we're consistently finding hundreds or anything, but it's still a really positive sign. And yeah.
Yeah, this is very cool. I've also done some wildlife fence monitoring as well, so this is really interesting. My question had more to do with your camera settings. Were you taking pictures at like set intervals along with motion capture, or were you only using motion capture?
Yeah, so we had hourly like field scan photos. Yeah, which we seem to usually catch snakes coming in. Occasionally we would get a field scan showing that a snake was still in there on the hour, but we wouldn't catch it leaving, partly because it's triggered by a heat difference. And so they would kind of become the same temperature as the surroundings. And that's just generally a struggle with herps and motion activated trail cameras. But for the most part, it seems like we got most of the snakes coming in. Yeah.
Great. I think that's it for that one. Well done. So next up, I'd like to welcome Lindsay Whitehead up, and who's going to talk about in the wake of wildfire, unraveling the effects of wildfire on Western rattlesnakes.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Lindsay. I am a part of the Larson Army from TRU, and today I'll be talking about my master's research in the wake of wildfire, unraveling the effects of wildfire on Western rattlesnakes. As we're all aware, Canada is currently facing a bit of a wildfire crisis. With prehistoric fire suppression tactics and changing environmental conditions, we are seeing an influx in the severity and intensity of wildfires. However, Canada also gets very cold. And in order to survive these cold climates, our snakes have evolved effective survival strategies such as hibernating in dens known as hibernacula. The species I'm going to be talking about today is not typically associated with cold climates, but we've already been talking about this species a lot already this morning. That is the Western rattlesnake. So Western rattlesnakes are a blue-listed or threatened species at risk in BC, and this is due to urban encroachment, road mortality, habitat loss, and of course, targeted violence. The home range or the distribution of the species ranges from the Baja Peninsula all the way into the southern interior of British Columbia, where they exist in 3 distinct pockets. We have one in the Thompson Valley, one in the South Okanagan, and then a small pocket in Grand Forks. The population I'm going to be talking about today has already been spoken about a ton this morning, and that is a population in Osoyoos, BC. Here at the Incomeep Desert Cultural Centre, we have what we believe to be the longest running snake research program in Canada. The Incomeep Desert Cultural Centre is owned and operated by a Osoyoos Indian band to showcase silk, culture, and heritage. The study site exists on a 450-hectare protected Osoyoos Indian band conservation land, and this ranges all the way from the vineyards in the back, all the way to the cultural centre up front. If you go up onto the hillsides there, we'll encounter our snake dens, and if you trek up way further, you get to Anarchist Mountain Protected Area, which is a lush ponderosa pine ecotype. The snake program has been around for a very long time, as we're all aware. It was originally established in 2002, and since then we've had 6 consecutive graduate students, all researching a variety of different topics that Carl highlighted earlier. I started on the project in 2022. However, 1 year before I began, disaster struck. In 2021, a 19,000-hectare wildfire tore through the study area, and this burnt through all known den and rookery locations. So the ecosystem before was primarily composed of sagebrush and antelope brush, and now you can see that we've got some devastating effects on the landscape with some severe changes in vegetation cover. One of the most concerning facts about this is that antelope brush has an incredibly long restoration period or regrowth period. So we're looking at potentially 2 to 3 decades before the antelope brush will fully recover. I've included here a fire severity map, and we can see that the fire was most severe on the Anarchist Mountain hillside, and it was less severe in the study area. It was mostly categorized as moderate to low severity within my study site. However, let me highlight that that green area labeled as unburnt is actually representative of the photo that you see on the right. We had some struggles with the NDVI imagery getting to show grassland environments, and this fire severity map greatly understates the severity of the wildfire. So before we dive too much into rattlesnakes, let's go over a quick summary of what we already know about wildfire and wildlife. So we'll start with the basics. Direct effects can include death. Indirect effects can include injury or illness, migration of species from one location to another, changes in prey density, and of course, drastic changes in habitat composition. So this snake here is one of the snakes that has experienced some of the effects of the wildfire. And if you haven't already seen, on his right-hand side, we can see some dense burn scars from the result from the 2021 wildfire. So this leads into my research question. How are Western rattlesnakes affected by wildfire? To answer this question, I'll be looking at body condition metrics, abundance, and movement. I won't be diving too much into movement today as my analysis is still at a very preliminary stage, but we'll touch on it briefly. So how did we do this? Well, we caught a lot of snakes. We were out in the field from April to October for 2022 and 2023, and we continued mark recapture efforts that had been ongoing since 2002. So upon capturing a snake, we would record the snout to vent length, the weather, the time, the date, the mass of the snake, the number of rattle segments, the sex, and would also equip them with a passive integrated transponder or a PIT tag, giving them their own unique species ID. So in my time on the project, we caught probably over 1,000 snakes. However, I'd love to say all of those snakes were uniquely new individuals, but they're not. We have a very, very high recapture rate in Osoyoos. And in the years that this project has been ongoing since 2002, we have 2,500 unique pit tags in the system. So we're catching a lot of the snakes over and over and over again. But field season has to come to an end. And I sat behind my computer pulling out my hair while I tried to analyze my data. So we first looked at body condition, and to do this, we used a scaled mass index. And we compared the body condition of the snakes at the Osoyoos site with snakes at an adjacent site 45 kilometers away. And this site was unburnt during the 2021 wildfire season. And on the y-axis, we've got our scaled mass index. On the x, we have our year. Osoyoos snakes are in blue, and orange is representative of the comparison site. While we were expecting a decline in body condition in the spring from 2021 to 2022, we actually don't see that, which is surprising. The comparison site really didn't add too much value to this in the end because we didn't see the trend that we were expecting to see in Osoyoos. But one interesting thing to note is that the comparison site snakes just have a much higher scaled mass index. And I've included this in here to get a bit of to really drive home how harsh the climate is in Osoyoos. Our snakes are typically very small and skinny, and when compared to other populations in BC, they have it pretty hard. Next, I looked at size distribution. So this is basically a leveled out histogram here. We have 3 years pre-wildfire in orange and 3 years post-wildfire in blue. So what we saw is post-wildfire is a shift towards smaller snakes. And one possible explanation for this may be that larger snakes were able to flee the wildfire less effectively. Potentially, these smaller snakes were able to burrow down deep into the rock cracks and withstand the heat more effectively than the larger snakes. So next, we looked at abundance. And while there are a ton of amazing R models out there that you can plug your data into, I tried really hard to make this work. But unfortunately, given the complexities of this data set, the size of it, and the number of recaptures, we could not get any models to converge. So that's where we got someone from UBC to come in and join the team, and he built us a custom, fully stochastic Bayesian Jolly-Sieber model to analyze the survival trends and abundance across the 2 decades. And this is what he found. So I sat here scratching my head a little bit. 2021 to 2022, we were really expecting to see a decline, but in fact, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing an increase in population from 2021 to 2022. However, 2022 onwards, we're seeing a bit of a gradual decline. It is unsure, though, if this decline is due to the indirect effects of the wildfire or natural fluctuations like we see in 2005 and 2012. So I hate to say it, but long-term monitoring is needed to know more. These early estimates, 2022, maybe to 2010, I take them with a little bit of a grain of salt at this stage, just because if you've ever tried to get 6 graduate students to keep work ethic consistent over a 20-year period, well, it's not exactly an easy task. So next we looked at survival, and while survival, we do see that decline from 2021 to 2022, we also see that decline throughout, and this just looks like a normal fluctuation. So Again, more monitoring to get a better idea whether or not this is an indirect effect or just natural fluctuations in the population. So next, I took a look at movement. And movement here, I will say this analysis is in progress, but let me drive home a few key preliminary findings that I've already discovered. To track movement, we radio tracked 41 snakes, and some of these were gravid females, non-gravid females, and males. And we tracked them for the duration of the active season. 36 of the 41 snakes we tracked post-wildfire remained in or went to seek unburnt habitat. So it almost looked like there were some signs of preferential selection. More to come with more analysis. Next, we looked at den switching. So den switching is a really interesting phenomenon as our snakes have high movement fidelity, meaning that they frequent the same dens year in, year out. And we'll consider a snake to have been from a certain den if they're caught in the late fall or the early spring at that den location. Den switching is when one snake is caught at a different den during the ingress or the egress period that is different to what they've been previously assigned. Pre-wildfire from 2002 to early spring 2021, we had 1 instance of den switching. However, post-wildfire, we had 10. Oh my gosh, this is going the wrong way. Yeah, so we're seeing really high rates of den switching post-wildfire. This may be to disruption in scent trails as a result of wildfire disturbance. So going back to those abundance graphs, I was really scratching my head. Why are we not seeing a decline from 2021 to 2022? And I've come up with a few possible explanations for this. The first is migration. If we look at the fire severity map again, we remember that the fire was most severe up on the Anarchist Mountain hillside. So that might have acted as a driving force, sending our snakes down into the study area closer to the lake. So possibly we're seeing an influx in the population as a result of new snakes migrating in. Next, I looked at prey, and we run an annual small mammal trapping event on this study area every single year. And this gives us an idea of what the prey composition is doing and how it's responding. So post-wildfire, we actually saw an influx in deer mice, which is consistent with literature that deer mice thrive post-disturbance. So maybe that the abundance and influx in prey population is supporting the snake population well, and they seem to be thriving. The last explanation I have for this is my favorite, and this is resiliency. So our snakes in Canada, our Western rattlesnakes, live in these lush ponderosa forests, and these ponderosa forests are known to be resilient and evolved to withstand these moderate to low severity burning events. So possibly these species that live in these ecosystems have evolved an effective survival strategy to withstand these burning events. And while I'd love to wrap up here by saying that snakes are resilient to wildfire, I can't. In 2023, the Eagle Bluffs wildfire tore through the other side of a Soyuz. This was a very high severity wildfire that jumped across the US border and evacuated most of the town. So I had the opportunity this spring to go out and survey the den areas, and we went and visited all known snake den locations that we could find, and unfortunately we didn't find much. It appeared that the fire totally decimated some of these areas, and we had very, very few surviving snakes. So I am very concerned about the snake population on this side of the lake. But this just serves as a case study that snakes are not necessarily resilient to all wildfires. So that leads me into one of my concluding remarks. And this is that fire variability really limits our ability to make generalizations on species survival. So we see with the Ink Creek wildfire, this low to moderate severity burning, our snakes may be surviving and persisting post-wildfire. However, with this higher severity wildfire, we're not necessarily seeing the same result. We do, however, continue to see snakes in these areas post-fire, in some areas post-fire, so we need to continue to protect critical snake habitat even post-disturbance so that these species have a place to recover. And lastly, I'll leave it here, but it is possible that the species is more resilient than we previously expected. They have evolved to withstand these low severity and moderate severity burning events that are characteristic of the ecosystem that they call home. Thank you.
That was great. We have time for a couple questions.
Thanks, that was super cool. I was just wondering, have there been any other wildfires in this area, like in the time that the long-term monitoring has happened? And if so, are you able to look at them like with your abundance and survival data and see if there's any patterns?
Yeah, that's a great question. On this piece of the Soyuz Indian Band Reserve, there hasn't been any like large major burning events during the study period. But it would be really cool if in the future we could keep this going and one day when a wildfire inevitably occurs, be able to fall back on this and make comparisons. Oh yeah, Carl brought up a really good point. So in that adjacent snake study that I'm talking about earlier, that actually experienced a burning event in 2023 or 22. When did we evacuate? I don't remember. And one of the telemetry snakes was actually in the fire area, and this snake actually booked it straight back to the den within 1 day. So it was right in the middle of active season. So we are seeing some like, I'm not going to sit here and burn behavior from the snakes. They're effectively fleeing the fire.
So next up, I love this title, Sabrina Lounsbury, and she's going to talk to us about snakes at the skate park, a novel half-pipe fence design for mitigating road mortality of Eastern Foxsnakes in Eastern Georgian Bay, Ontario. And we're also now moving into the 5-minute.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sabrina. I'm from Laurentian University, and I'm working in collaboration with the Georgian Bay Biosphere on a novel half-pipe fence design for mitigating road mortality of Eastern Foxsnakes. So I probably speak for a lot of you when I say that my iNaturalist this summer had a lot more dead-on-road observations than it did alive-on-road observations. And reptile road mortality is a known problem, but luckily there are mitigation measures being used to help protect them, like barrier fences, eco-passages, and signage. But unfortunately, mitigation is not always effective, and this can depend on your target species, the material you're using, and the required maintenance. A lot of the times they're very expensive to install and maintain, and this can lead to poor quality mitigation that doesn't hold up in the long term and can sometimes make problems worse. Public Works departments and First Nations have also expressed that traditional vertical fencing can impede road maintenance and access to traditional lands. So my team and I wanted to know whether a concave half-pipe fence design is effective at mitigating road mortality for large-bodied snake species like the Eastern Foxsnake. This is my study site in Eastern Georgian Bay, where they built this causeway directly through a provincially significant wetland, and then ironically named it Conservation Drive. Unsurprisingly, it was identified as a reptile road mortality hotspot during road surveys in 2021 and 2022, and this prompted the construction of a mitigation pilot project in October of 2022. The mitigation consists of a plastic culvert that's cut in half lengthwise and installed at grade with the road. And this creates this half pipe barrier that does not impede access to the land or impede road maintenance. And the end result is something that looks like this. So the curve of the fence is designed to prevent animals from climbing over the mitigation and onto the road. And then we also have 4 eco-passages that are integrated into the fence to maintain habitat connectivity. We have 3 aquatic culverts and 1 terrestrial culvert. We used Eastern Foxsnakes in 45-minute in situ behavioral trials against the fence, and we wanted to know whether the snakes were able to climb over the mitigation and if it was effective at preventing them from accessing the road. So over the past 2 years, we have trialed 22 individual adult fox snakes in a total of 29 behavioral stays against the fence, and we found that the fence was effective at preventing all but 1 snake from climbing over the fence. No snakes were able to climb the concave barrier wall, and we had about 12 snakes who attempted to climb the supporting rebar, but only the 1 was successful. This was our 1 snake that did climb the mitigation. He was our largest snake during the project by body mass and our 2nd largest by total length. So he's about 143 centimeters long and weighed over 1 kilogram. And we were able to recap this individual twice this year. So we were able to test him twice on the fence, each about a month apart from each other. And during his first attempt, he was unsuccessful in climbing the wall or the rebar. But during his 2nd attempt, he very quickly learned how to use the rebar to get over that top lip of the fence and successfully escape our trial arena. The fence is designed so that there's a 20-centimeter overhang above each of the supporting rebar. And the thought was that if snakes do climb the rebar, that they wouldn't be able to get over that top lip. But obviously this individual was large enough that he could do so. So throughout this project, we learned that a
a concave fence is effective at preventing climbing, but that a larger overhang is needed to prevent large snakes from climbing to the top of the supporting rebar. We also learned that snakes can and will find holes and gaps in your fence, and that can lead to entrapment. And so our solution for this was to fill everything with spray foam. But we found during our trials that the snakes could use the spray foam as additional grip for climbing, and they were able to climb higher on the wall in sections that were spray foamed compared to where there was no spray foam. And so we may need to explore other options for this in the future. And finally, I suspect that snakes may learn how to climb the fence over time. We were able to test 5 individuals on the fence more than once, and each time all of our snakes had more climbing attempts of the barrier wall and the supporting rebar than they did previously, and the one snake that did climb over the fence did so on his second attempt. So I suggest that any future research in behavior would test snakes multiple times over a longer time period. So if this mitigation design is effective for fox snakes, which are very large-bodied snake species and excellent climbers, then we can assume it would also be effective for non-climbing reptiles and amphibians and small mammals, which would protect biodiversity on a broader scale. And thank you.
That was very cool. Okay, next up, we have Caroline Lafond, and she's going to talk to us about reoccupation of rookery sites by female Western rattlesnakes post-wildfire.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline. I'm also one of Carl's students. I'm going to talk to you again about Western rattlesnake. I think everyone's going to be really familiar with this species after this round. And let's jump into it. So wildfire. What do we know about wildfire? So they play an important ecological role. So low to moderate fire intensity can enhance plant growth and biodiversity. But higher fire severity and intensity are increasing globally, and their impact are quite not well understood. So some species will benefit from it, but others might see population decline. Grassland are ecosystems that are well adapted to low to moderate fire intensity. But with climate changing faster than they can adapt, how do the species living within grassland can adapt to the changing condition? It is especially true for Western rattlesnake. So they show remarkable fidelity to their den and their foraging grounds. So fidelity refers to when an individual reuses the same area year after year. What do we know about their female reproduction? So for Western rattlesnake, there's been a lot of research done on male, but not too much research done on female, especially their reproduction. So the gravid female, the pregnant female, they have successful reproduction, they require to minimize their energy expenditure, and they also need to maintain a certain temperature for embryo development. So the vegetation around the birding site is going to be really important. They also have their reproduction cycle also between 2 to 3 years, so they don't always, not every year they're going to be pregnant, and I'm sorry, I forgot. So the vegetation between their birding sites can be really important. So our birding site refers to rookeries. The rookeries can be used by 1 to multiple female year after years. They can be different things. So they can be a bigger, flatter rock. They can be a crack at the base of a cliff. They can be a rock pile, and they can also be their hibernacula. There have been previous research done by Dana I between 2017 to 2019. So she found that a few individuals were reusing the same rookeries during their every single reproduction cycle. And she also found different characteristics. So their rookery selection did not depend on prey abundance, but it depends on different characteristics that are referring to the same temperature. They maintain the same temperature, and they also have similar rock cover and also shrub cover. So in 2021, there's been a wildfire that went through one of Dana I's sites, the same wildfire that Lindsay talked to us earlier. The Inkimid Creek Desert Center got partly on fire. So this offers us like a great opportunity to look at, are the female going to reuse the same rookery after the wildfire? This brings us to our objective. So our main objective was to determine whether the female reuse the same rookeries 2 years after the wildfire. Then we look at different smaller objectives. So we wanted to see what was the change in vegetation cover after the wildfire at the rookery. Then we wanted to look at if the same female were reusing the same rookery. And also we wanted to look at their body condition. So we had 2 sites. The 2 sites were used by Dana I during her study. One of them was in the Inkimit Desert Culture Center located in Osoyoos and Dien Bien. And the other one was White Lake, which is just outside Penticton. So they showed a similar ecosystem as well. So our first question, do rookery remain occupied 2 years after the wildfire? So out of 25 rookeries that we were monitoring, 19 of them were reused. And as we can see on this graph, the same amount of rookeries, so 3 rookeries were empty, but the same amount of burn and unburned. So that shows that there was no significant change in the rookery occupancy after the wildfire. Looking at vegetation, so we look at the condition before the wildfire, we look at the vegetation cover to after the wildfire, and we also look at our control site in White Lake. We were looking at different scales, so we look at the smaller scale, medium scale, and larger scale. So the scale refers to the radius around the rookery. So smaller scale was 1 meter radius around the rookery, medium scale 3 meter radius around the rookery, and larger scale 10 meter radius around the rookery. And we look at different layers. So we wanted to know the canopy cover of tree, shrub, and grass layer. So these methodologies follow the same thing as what Dana I did in her previous study. We wanted to compare what was the changing vegetation between burned rookery to unburned, and also what was the difference in vegetation between the occupied rookery and the empty one. So what we found is that we had significant results for the smaller scale and the medium scale. So the burned rookery had more abundance of grass cover, and also occupied rookery has more abundance of grass cover. So on this photo, you can see actually this was during one of the site visits. One of the female gravid rattlesnake was actually basking in front of her rookery, and you can barely see it. Having a lot of grass can also reduce predation and can also maintain this temperature that they require for embryo development. We also found that empty rookery has more shrub cover, so maybe at a certain level of shrub, they actually stop using them as there's less sun exposure. And we found no significant result at a larger scale, so the vegetation at a larger scale did not really matter. And then we look at if the same female reused the same rookeries post-wildfire. So we recaptured 11 gravid female during our season, and all of them reused the same rookery. So we have no recaptured female that used a different rookery. So that was quite significant. And then we look at the body condition. So the body condition was measured as a ratio of mass to snout to vent length. And so for all captured gravid female, we look at the average body condition before the wildfire and after the wildfire for both sides. And we had significant difference that there was actually a decrease of body conditions for both sides. So the decrease in body condition was not referred to the wildfire, but to another environmental change that were affecting both sides. In 2022, we did not have any data for the Inkimit site. And so as a conclusion, the female were reusing the same rookeries 2 years after the wildfire. And we hope that this study is going to contribute to a better understanding of female ecology and rookery persistence. Thank you.
Nice work. And now we have Ryan Wolf coming up to talk to us about testing the use of artificial nesting structures, a case study in Eastern Foxsnake and blue racer.
So hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Wolf. I'm a biologist at Natural Resource Solutions, Inc., or NRSI. And like they said, I'm going to be talking about testing the use of artificial snake nesting structures by blue racer and foxsnake. So the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources has a best management practices guide that says that artificial snake habitat, if you're trying to create it for gray rat snake, Eastern foxsnake, and blue racer, should use a nesting cage or nesting box design that they provide guidelines on how to construct it and what materials to fill it with. And these have been widely used across Southern Ontario. And they have quite a bit of documented use by gray rat snake, especially in Eastern Ontario, or only in Eastern Ontario. And there is limited observations of fox snakes using this as well. I've only been able to find 2 studies that have shown this to be used by them. And the guideline also states that additional research is needed to test the use of these structures, particularly for blue racer. So that's how this project started. It was actually initiated by Jennifer McCarter when she worked at NRSI. And 30 nesting structures were installed across Pelee Island over the range of blue racer and also Eastern Foxsnake between 2019 and 2020. And then Heather Fotherby, sitting over there from NRSI, added to this project with an additional 18 nesting structures being installed in 2020 in both Norfolk or across Norfolk and Elgin counties, again within the range of Eastern Foxsnake. So we followed the best management practices guidelines on the construction of these designs. The cages, we put in the recommended mixture of 1/3 mulch, 1/3 straw, and 1/3 leaf litter into about half of them. And the other half were experimental, where we fully filled them with just straw. And then we put some amount of large sticks in all of them to provide some structure and gaps so that I don't know. Please hold. Okay. I don't know if that needs to be plugged in, Pam. Just in case. Yeah. I don't know where the
Guys.
anyways. Thanks.
No.
That's all good. So yeah, we put in we have 4 different experimental treatment types, I guess you can call them. So they were labeled either to be fully filled with just straw and have a high or low amount of sticks, or they use the recommended mixture of 1/3 of those different substrates, I guess, and the high or low amount of sticks. And so that 1 meter square plot in the bottom right is an example of what a large amount of sticks would be. Okay. So then we had biologists every year go and monitor these nesting structures, where they would actually sort through all of the nesting material to look for evidence of, egg shell fragments or neonates that were still in the structures. But despite 4 years of monitoring on Pelee Island and the 2 years of monitoring in Norfolk and Elgin counties, we didn't find any nesting evidence in any of the structures. But we did find shed skins, and we found natural nests of blue racer and Eastern Foxsnake on Pelee in close proximity to the nesting structures, just not actually using them. And we even found individuals of all age classes within the nesting structures, including neonates of both species, but no nesting at all. So another way that we looked at the suitability of these nesting structures for egg incubation was to monitor their internal temperatures. We put iButton data loggers inside every one of the structures over the oviposition and incubation period. And, basically from the average temperatures and minimum and maximum, we were within the proper incubation temperatures throughout the whole period, except there might have been one instance in one structure in 2022 where a maximum temperature might have caused some desiccation. But for the most part, they hit the proper temperatures for egg incubation. So the conclusions, we have the artificial nesting structures providing suitable conditions, apparently. And we had snakes actually using the nesting structures for shelter habitats, shedding, probably foraging as well. But no nesting actually occurred in any of the structures that were built with either the experimental design or the BMP guidelines. So what this means is we probably want to look at potential other options for creating nesting structures for these species. And that's one thing that we're doing now. So based off of the I guess natural, the blue racer and Eastern Foxsnake nests that we found on Pelee Island that weren't laid in the nesting structures, we're trying to mimic those. So we've created a new design that we're testing this year and next year that uses new materials. And basically the concept is to provide them with a method of entry that is easier than trying to push their way into the dense substrate that compacts inside these structures, which is one reason we're thinking they might not be using them. Yeah, so thanks everyone for listening. And so thanks Jen and Heather for, starting this project. And I think there's some good things that might come of this in the future.